Growing up in the suburbs of Damascus, my earliest memories are painted with the golden hues of dawn prayers and the melodious echo of the adhan floating through our neighborhood. My father, a respected imam at our local mosque, would wake me before sunrise, his gentle hand on my shoulder accompanied by whispered verses from the Quran. Those moments, half dreaming and half awake, formed the foundation of my faith, a foundation I believed would never crack. Our home was a testament to devotion, walls adorned with intricate calligraphy of Allah's names, shelves lined with religious texts that I would spend hours studying under my father's patient guidance. My mother, though less vocal in her faith, embodied its principles in every action. Her kindness extended beyond our family, cooking extra meals for neighbors in need and teaching Quran to young girls in our community who couldn't afford proper religious education. I excelled in my religious studies, memorizing substantial portions of the Quran by age 12, earning admiration from our community. The pride in my father's eyes when I led my first prayer at the mosque still burns bright in my memory. Yet, looking back now, I wonder if that pride was directed at my genuine connection with faith or merely at my perfect recitation of the verses. The day of the accident began like any other. I was driving to the university where I taught Islamic studies, my mind preoccupied with the lecture I would deliver on the concept of divine mercy. The irony of that morning's topic still haunts me. The last thing I remember was reaching to adjust the radio, the familiar voice of a Quran reciter filling my car. Then, a flash of metal, the screech of brakes, and the world spinning into darkness. They told me later that the truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel, crossing into my lane on the highway. The impact was devastating, leaving my car a twisted wreck of metal and glass. But what happened next defied all physical explanation, transcending the boundaries between life and death in a way that would forever alter my understanding of existence. In those moments between consciousness and what doctors would later call clinical death, I experienced something that no amount of religious study had prepared me for. The transition was not sudden. It felt like being gradually immersed in warm water, each sensation dissolving into the next. The physical pain of the accident faded, replaced by a weightlessness that seemed to lift my consciousness from my broken body. The space I found myself in defied description in any earthly language. It wasn't the paradise described in the Hadith, with its rivers of milk and honey, nor was it the terrifying realm of judgment I had warned my students about. Instead, it was a dimension of pure awareness, where thought and existence merged into one seamless reality. A voice, or perhaps more accurately a presence, enveloped me. It carried no gender, no age, no human characteristics, yet it resonated with a familiarity that touched the deepest core of my being. Welcome, it seemed to say, though no words were actually spoken. This is the place where truth cannot hide. As this presence embraced me, a figure materialized, not in any physical form, but as a concentration of light and understanding that my consciousness could comprehend. It radiated justice, but not the stern, unforgiving kind I had often preached about. This was justice tempered with profound compassion, understanding, and love so deep it brought tears to my non-physical form. The figure began to show me my life, not as a linear progression of events, but as a tapestry where every moment existed simultaneously. I saw myself as a child, earnestly practicing my prayers, but I also saw the times I had used my religious knowledge to elevate myself above others. I witnessed my charitable actions, but also the subtle pride that often accompanied them. Each memory was accompanied by its true impact on the souls around me, revealing a complex web of cause and effect I had never considered. There were moments that I had considered insignificant, a kind word to a struggling student, a smile shared with a stranger, a moment of genuine forgiveness offered to someone who had wronged me. In the divine light of this space, these simple acts shone brighter than many of my grand religious gestures. Conversely, times when I had dismissed others' spiritual experiences or judged them for their different beliefs cast dark shadows across my soul's landscape. The presence showed me a particular memory that I had long forgotten. I was 16, standing outside our mosque after Friday prayers. A homeless man had approached me, asking not for money, but for someone to listen to his story. Busy with my religious duties, I had dismissed him, quoting a hadith about the importance of punctuality in prayer. Now, I felt the man's pain and loneliness as if it were my own, understanding how my rigid adherence to religious protocol had missed an opportunity for true spiritual service. These revelations continued, each more profound than the last, stripping away the layers of self-deception I had built around my faith. I saw how often I had used religion as a shield rather than a bridge, how my certainty in my beliefs had sometimes closed my heart to the divine truth present in other paths. The figure seemed to pulse with increasing intensity, and I felt myself being drawn closer to its radiant core. In that moment, I understood that I was being shown not just my life, but the very nature of divine judgment itself. It wasn't a cold weighing of good deeds against bad, as I had always taught. Instead, it was a profound revelation of the truth of one's existence, an understanding of how each soul affects the great tapestry of creation. As this understanding deepened, I began to feel an overwhelming sense of love, not the limited human love I had known, but something vast and unconditional. This love seemed to reveal the true purpose of religion, not to divide and judge, but to awaken humanity to its inherent connection with the divine and with each other. The experience reached a crescendo as the figure showed me one final vision, a possible future where my understanding of faith transformed from a rigid structure into a living, breathing expression of divine love. I saw myself helping others find their own path to truth, free from the constraints of dogma and fear. This vision filled me with both terror and excitement, as I realized that everything I had built my life upon was about to change. Just as this revelation reached its peak, I felt a pulling sensation, different from anything that had come before. The figure's light began to fade, but its presence left an indelible mark on my soul. The last thing I remember from that realm was a thought, or perhaps a blessing, impressed upon my consciousness. Remember that true faith is not about knowing the right answers, but about asking the right questions. The return to my physical body was jarring. The sterile brightness of the hospital room replaced the divine light, and the beeping of medical machines replaced the profound silence of the other realm. I could hear voices around me, doctors, nurses, my family members, but they seemed distant, as if reaching me through a thick fog. My body felt heavy, constrained, almost foreign after the lightness I had experienced. As my eyes adjusted to the harsh fluorescent lighting, I saw my father's worried face hovering above me, his lips moving in prayer. The words of the Quran, once so familiar and comforting, now felt like echoes from a different life. I tried to speak, to share what I had experienced, but my throat was too dry, my body too weak. Instead, I lay there, tears streaming down my face, as the full weight of what I had witnessed began to settle into my consciousness. The medical staff called it a miracle that I had survived. They spoke of statistics and vital signs, of the moments my heart had stopped and started again. But I knew that the real miracle wasn't my survival. It was the transformation that had begun in that space between life and death, a transformation that would challenge everything I thought I knew about faith, justice, and the true nature of divine love. The hospital room became my monastery of contemplation over the next few weeks. Each beep of the heart monitor reminded me of my temporary departure from this world, while the steady drip of 4 fluids marked time in a way that felt both mundane and profound. The figure's revelations haunted my waking hours, making the sterile hospital environment feel like sacred ground where I was forced to confront every aspect of my former life. My visitors came in waves, family members, mosque congregants, university colleagues, each bearing gifts and prayers for my recovery. But their well wishes felt like pebbles skipping across the surface of a deep ocean of transformation within me. Every Alhamdulillah and Mashallah they uttered struck a discordant chord against the new understanding taking root in my soul. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset painted patterns on my hospital wall, a particular memory from my experience surfaced with stunning clarity. The divine presence had shown me a scene from 3 years ago, a day when one of my students had come to me in crisis. She was struggling with doubts about her faith, questioning the strict interpretations I had been teaching. Instead of offering compassion or understanding, I had dismissed her concerns as whispers from Shaitan, prescribing more prayer and fasting as the solution. Now, in that hospital room, I felt her pain as if it were my own. The divine presence had made me experience the crushing weight of shame and isolation my words had placed upon her young shoulders. I saw how my rigid response had pushed her not toward God, but away from any spiritual connection. The realization brought fresh tears to my eyes, tears that my concerned nurse mistook for physical pain. These revelations continued to unfold, each one more challenging than the last. I remembered the day I had refused to attend my cousin's wedding because he had married outside our faith. The figure had shown me the ripples of pain my decision had sent through our family, the way it had torn relationships that were meant to be bridges of love. I saw now how my actions had represented not divine law, but human pride masked as religious devotion. The most difficult confrontations came at night, when the hospital grew quiet and the barriers between this world and my memory of the divine presence seemed thinnest. I would lie awake, watching shadows play across the ceiling, as scene after scene from my life unfolded in my mind with the same piercing clarity I had experienced during my near-death journey. I saw myself standing at the pulpit of our mosque, delivering passionate sermons about God's mercy while simultaneously judging and condemning those who didn't meet my standards of piety. The divine presence had shown me how my words, though technically correct according to religious texts, had been tainted by an underlying current of spiritual arrogance. I had been using knowledge as a weapon rather than a healing balm. One night, a particularly powerful memory emerged. I was walking through the university campus, engaged in heated debate with a colleague from the comparative religion department. He had suggested that divine truth might exist in other faiths, that perhaps Allah's mercy extended beyond the boundaries we had drawn. I had responded with a barrage of memorized verses and hadith, effectively shutting down any meaningful dialogue. The figure had shown me how that moment exemplified my greatest spiritual weakness, the inability to see that divine wisdom often comes through unexpected channels. My father visited daily, sitting quietly by my bedside, reading Quran in his melodious voice. One afternoon, he paused in his recitation and looked at me with concern. "You seem troubled, my son," he said, reaching for my hand. "Your eyes, they're different somehow." I wanted to tell him everything about the light, the presence, the profound revelations about the true nature of faith. But how could I explain that the very foundations he had helped me build were now being reconstructed by a force beyond my understanding? The physical therapy sessions became a metaphor for my spiritual struggle. Just as I had to relearn how to walk, putting one shaky foot in front of the other, I was also learning to navigate this new spiritual landscape. Each step was uncertain, painful, yet necessary for my recovery. My physiotherapist, a Christian woman named Sarah, seemed to sense that my healing went beyond the physical. She would often sit with me after our sessions, sharing stories about her own faith journey. In the past, I would have dismissed her insights or tried to convert her. Now, I found myself listening with new ears, recognizing the divine wisdom in her words regardless of their source. As my physical strength returned, the hospital's imam came to visit. He was a kind man I had known for years, someone who had always admired my religious knowledge. He sat beside my bed and began to speak about the miracle of my survival, interpreting it through the traditional lens of Islamic theology. But as he spoke, I felt a growing disconnect between his words and my experience. The God he described seemed smaller somehow, more confined by human interpretations than the vast, all-encompassing presence I had encountered. One morning, a young nurse was checking my vital signs when she accidentally knocked over my prayer beads. As she apologized and reached to pick them up, our eyes met, and I saw in her gentle embarrassment the same divine light I had witnessed in my near-death experience. It was a profound moment of recognition, the understanding that the divine presence I had encountered existed not just in religious symbols and rituals, but in every genuine human interaction. The most challenging aspect of my hospital stay was confronting the gap between my previous religious teaching and my new understanding of spiritual truth. I had spent years memorizing and teaching religious texts, priding myself on my ability to quote chapter and verse in any situation. Now, those same texts felt like beautiful but incomplete maps to a territory that was far more vast and mysterious than I had imagined. During my final week in the hospital, I received a visit from an unexpected guest, the truck driver who had caused the accident. He was a middle-aged man named Ahmad, his face lined with guilt and worry. In the past, I might have met him with cold judgment or formal forgiveness backed by religious obligation. Instead, I found myself reaching out to him with genuine compassion, seeing in his suffering the same divine spark I had recognized in my own pain. As my discharge date approached, the hospital staff began preparing me for my return home. They gave instructions about medication, physical therapy exercises, and follow-up appointments. But my real concern was how to navigate the spiritual transformation that had begun in that space between life and death. How could I return to my role as a religious teacher when everything I thought I knew had been so fundamentally challenged? The night before my discharge, I had a dream that felt as real as my near-death experience. In it, the same radiant figure appeared, but instead of showing me past moments, it revealed countless faces, people I had yet to meet, souls who would be part of my new journey. The message was clear. My confrontation with conscience wasn't just about recognizing past mistakes. It was about preparing for a future where I could help others find their way to authentic spiritual truth. My last morning in the hospital, I sat in a wheelchair by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The same sun had risen every day of my life, but now I saw it differently, not just as a creation of Allah, but as a symbol of the divine light that exists in every soul, regardless of their faith or path. As the nurse came to help me prepare for discharge, I realized that my time in the hospital had been more than physical recovery. It had been a chrysalis, a sacred space where my old understanding had died and something new had begun to emerge. The journey from my hospital bed to the waiting wheelchair, and then to my father's car, felt like crossing a threshold between two worlds. I was leaving behind not just the physical space where my body had healed, but also the contemplative sanctuary where my conscience had been stripped bare and restructured. As we drove home, the familiar streets of my city seemed different, each person we passed glowing with the potential for divine connection I had glimpsed in my near-death experience. My mother was waiting at our front door, tears of joy streaming down her face as she embraced me. In her arms, I felt both the comfort of returning home and the bittersweet knowledge that I was no longer the son who had left that fateful morning. The confrontation with my conscience had transformed me in ways that would soon become apparent to everyone who knew me, starting with those who loved me most. The familiar scent of my mother's cardamom coffee filled our house the morning after my return, but even this comfort felt somehow foreign. I sat at our kitchen table, watching her move through her morning routine, the same one I had witnessed countless times before. She hummed quietly while preparing breakfast, occasionally glancing at me with a mixture of joy and concern, as if she could sense that something fundamental had shifted within her son. The first call to prayer of the day echoed through our neighborhood, and for the first time in my life, I didn't immediately rise to perform wudu. Instead, I remained seated, letting the melodious adhan wash over me while remembering how different divine presence had felt during my experience. My mother paused in her cooking, wooden spoon suspended mid-stir, watching me with growing unease. "Are you still too weak to pray, Habibi?" she asked, her voice careful, measured. The question carried weight beyond its simple words. It was the first crack in the foundation of what would become a widening chasm between my old life and my new reality. "I'm praying, Mama," I replied softly, "but perhaps not in the way you would recognize." The spoon resumed its stirring, but slower now, hesitant. In the small space between us, decades of shared understanding began to shift like sand beneath our feet. The first few weeks at home developed a rhythm that felt like living in two worlds simultaneously. On the surface, I went through the motions of recovery, physical therapy exercises, doctor's appointments, receiving well-wishers who brought dishes of stuffed grape leaves and promises of prayers. But beneath this familiar routine, my inner world churned with questions and revelations that continued to unfold from my experience. My father's friends from the mosque came to visit regularly, each bringing their own expectations of how a miraculous survival should transform someone. They wanted to hear about bright lights leading to paradise, about angels reciting Quran, about experiences that would confirm everything they already believed. Instead, I sat quietly, offering bland smiles and non-committal responses, while inside my mind replayed scenes of profound universal truth that transcended any single religious tradition. One afternoon, Sheikh Abdullah, my father's closest friend and a respected scholar, came to visit. He sat across from me in our living room, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "Your father tells me you've been different since the accident," he began, carefully choosing his words. "That you haven't been to the mosque, that you speak of strange things when you think no one is listening." I looked at this man who had known me since childhood, who had celebrated my memorization of the Quran, who had proudly attended my first lecture at the university. The compassion I had experienced during my near-death experience welled up within me, allowing me to see him with new eyes, not just as a religious authority, but as a soul doing his best to navigate the mystery of existence through the map he had been given. "Sheikh Abdullah," I responded, choosing my words carefully, "what if I told you that what I experienced showed me that Allah's mercy is vaster than anything we've been teaching? That the divine presence I encountered cared less about the perfection of our prayer movements and more about the genuine love in our hearts?" The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken accusations of heresy. Sheikh Abdullah's fingers worked his prayer beads faster, clicking them together in a rhythm that seemed to counter the dangerous direction of my words. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority that had once commanded my complete respect. "These are dangerous thoughts, my son. The accident has confused you. Shaitan often uses moments of weakness to plant seeds of doubt. But they weren't seeds of doubt. They were seeds of a deeper understanding, planted by that divine presence itself." How could I explain that what they saw as confusion was actually clarity? That what they interpreted as straying was actually a closer walk with the divine than I had ever experienced in all my years of rigid observance? The university called about my return to teaching, but I requested an extended leave of absence. The thought of standing before my students, teaching the same rigid interpretations that my experience had shown to be so limited, felt like a betrayal of the truth I had witnessed. My department head, a man who had once praised my orthodox approach to Islamic studies, now spoke to me with carefully masked concern, as if my accident had damaged more than just my body. My sister Amira visited often, bringing her children who filled the house with much-needed laughter. One evening, as we sat in the garden watching her young ones play, she gathered the courage to ask what everyone had been wondering. "What really happened to you in there, brother? What did you see that's changed you so much?" I looked at her children, witnessing how freely they expressed their joy, how naturally they embodied the divine love I had experienced. "I saw that we've built walls where Allah intended bridges," I finally answered. "I saw that every soul carries a spark of the divine, regardless of how they pray or what name they use for God." Tears welled in her eyes, not of understanding, but of fear for her beloved brother who seemed to be losing his way. "You're scaring me," she whispered. "These ideas, they're not from our religion. Perhaps you should see someone, talk to a professional about what you experienced." The suggestion that my profound spiritual awakening needed psychological treatment became a common theme in the weeks that followed. Family members exchanged worried glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Whispered conversations stopped abruptly when I entered rooms. Well-meaning friends recommended various religious counselors who specialized in helping people whose faith had been shaken by trauma. Even my dreams offered no refuge. Night after night, I relived moments from my near-death experience, each replay revealing new layers of meaning, new implications that I struggled to integrate into my waking life. I would wake in the pre-dawn darkness, my heart racing, my mind full of visions of that divine light that had shown me the true nature of judgment and love. The breaking point came during a family gathering to celebrate my recovery. Relatives had come from all over the city, bringing food and good wishes. As we sat together after the meal, my young cousin Ahmed asked me to tell him about heaven, since I had been there. The room grew quiet, all eyes turning to me, eager for confirmation of their beliefs. Instead, I spoke about the divine presence I had encountered, about how it had shown me that our everyday acts of kindness carried more weight than our religious observations, about how the boundaries we created between faiths meant nothing in that realm of pure truth.